What started as a simple mother-daughter trip to visit family turned into a nightmare at 30,000 feet. Sarah Johnson, a dedicated nurse from Chicago, thought she was just taking her 5-year-old daughter Emma to see her uncle in Seattle. She had no idea that one flight attendant's prejudice would set in motion a chain of events that would expose a shocking pattern of discrimination, threaten careers, and ultimately transform an entire airline industry. Jennifer Phillips had been getting away with it for years: subtle harassment, manufactured complaints, and intimidation tactics targeting passengers who didn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable. 17 complaints had been filed against her, and 17 times her supervisor had looked the other way. Jennifer thought she was untouchable. She was wrong, because the quiet, well-dressed woman she chose to terrorize wasn't just another passenger trying to travel peacefully with her child. The little girl she frightened and humiliated wasn't just another target for her prejudice. They were family to someone with the power to ensure that Jennifer's reign of discrimination would finally come to an end. Sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person you underestimate turns out to be exactly the wrong person to cross. And sometimes, when you threaten the wrong family, you discover that karma doesn't just catch up with you, it obliterates you. This is the story of how one flight attendant's worst impulses met their perfect match, and how a mother's love became the catalyst for industry-wide change. Sarah Johnson adjusted her daughter's seatbelt one more time, smoothing down 5-year-old Emma's unruly curls with gentle fingers. The little girl clutched her favorite stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, against her chest as she peered out the airplane window with wide, curious eyes. "Mama, are we really going to see Uncle Michael?" Emma whispered, her voice filled with excitement and a hint of nervousness. Sarah smiled, though exhaustion tugged at the corners of her eyes. It had been 3 years since she'd last seen her older brother. 3 years since their father's funeral had brought the scattered Johnson family together for one painful weekend. Life had gotten in the way. Her divorce, Michael's demanding career, and the 1,000 miles that separated Chicago from Seattle. "Yes, sweetheart. Uncle Michael is very excited to meet you properly. You were so little last time." Sarah buckled her own seatbelt as passengers continued filing onto Flight 447. She'd splurged on these tickets, using money she'd been saving for months from her job as a nurse at Chicago General Hospital. Emma deserved to know her uncle, and Sarah needed this break more than she cared to admit. The past year had been particularly challenging. The divorce from Emma's father had been finalized 6 months ago, leaving Sarah to navigate single motherhood while working long shifts at the hospital. Her ex-husband had shown little interest in maintaining a relationship with Emma, which broke Sarah's heart more than her own disappointment. But she was determined to give her daughter a stable, loving home, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. As they waited for takeoff, Sarah pulled out her phone to text Michael. "Boarding complete. Should arrive on time at 3:30 p.m. Emma's so excited." She attached a photo of Emma grinning with Mr. Peanuts. Michael's response came quickly. "Can't wait. I've cleared my whole afternoon. Have something special planned for my favorite niece." Sarah chuckled. Emma was his only niece, but the sentiment warmed her heart. Michael had always been protective of his little sister, even though their lives had taken such different paths. While Sarah had chosen nursing, drawn to helping others through their most vulnerable moments, Michael had climbed the corporate ladder with determination and brilliance that had impressed everyone around him. She remembered how proud their parents had been when Michael landed his first big promotion at Anderson Airlines. "My son, the executive," their mother would beam to anyone who would listen. Sarah had never felt jealous. She was proud of Michael, too. They'd both found their calling, just in different worlds. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, beginning the standard safety demonstration. Sarah half-listened while helping Emma identify the emergency exits, turning it into a little game. Emma giggled as she pointed to each one, counting on her fingers. "Mama, Will Uncle Michael look the same? Emma asked during a lull in the announcement. Probably a little older like Mama, but he'll have the same kind eyes and the same big smile. Sarah showed Emma the photo on her phone from Christmas 3 years ago. Michael, in an expensive suit, his arm around Sarah, both of them laughing at something their father had said. It was one of the last good memories before everything became complicated by illness and grief. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Sarah felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness flutter in her stomach. She'd been looking forward to this visit for months, but there was always that underlying worry that came with traveling alone with a young child. Emma was generally well-behaved, but airplane travel could be unpredictable for little ones. "Remember our airplane rules?" Sarah asked quietly. Emma nodded solemnly. "Use my inside voice, keep my seatbelt on, and be polite to everyone." "That's my smart girl." The plane picked up speed, and Emma pressed her face to the window, watching the ground fall away beneath them. "We're flying, Mama, just like the birds." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling grateful for these moments of pure joy that children brought to even the most ordinary experiences. Despite all the challenges they'd faced, Emma remained optimistic and curious about the world around. As they reached cruising altitude, Sarah allowed herself to relax slightly. The hardest part was over. They were airborne and on their way to what she hoped would be a wonderful weekend. Michael had promised to show them around Seattle, including a trip to the waterfront and the famous Pike Place Market. Emma had been practicing her fish-throwing pose for weeks, much to Sarah's amusement. She thought about how different her life might have been if she'd followed Michael's path into business, but she couldn't imagine doing anything other than nursing. Every day brought new challenges and rewards, and knowing she was making a difference in people's lives during their most difficult moments gave her a sense of purpose that no corporate promotion could match. The flight attendant began the beverage service, and Sarah requested apple juice for Emma and coffee for herself. As she watched her daughter color quietly in her activity book, Sarah felt a wave of contentment wash over her. They were going to have a wonderful weekend, and maybe, just maybe, this trip would be the beginning of rebuilding the family connections that had been strained by time and distance. Little did she know that this flight would become much more memorable than she could ever have imagined. 2 hours into the flight, Emma was getting restless despite Sarah's best efforts to keep her entertained. The coloring books had lost their appeal, and even Mr. Peanuts couldn't hold her attention for long. Sarah glanced around the cabin, noting that several other children were also becoming fidgety. "Mama, I need to use the bathroom," Emma whispered urgently. Sarah looked down the aisle toward the restrooms. The seatbelt sign was off, and the flight attendants had finished their beverage service. It seemed like a good time to make the trip. "Of course, sweetheart, let's go." They made their way carefully down the narrow aisle, Emma holding Sarah's hand tightly. The airplane restroom was cramped, but they managed. As they were washing their hands, Emma accidentally knocked the paper towel dispenser, causing several towels to scatter on the floor. "Oops," Emma said, immediately bending down to pick them up. "It's okay, baby. Accidents happen." Sarah helped her gather the towels and dispose of them properly. "See? All clean." As they exited the restroom, Emma stumbled slightly in the aisle, her tired legs getting tangled. She caught herself on a nearby armrest, but the passenger, a well-dressed older woman, jerked away as if she'd been burned. "Excuse me," Sarah said politely, helping Emma regain her balance. The woman glared at them with obvious disdain. "Some people shouldn't travel with children if they can't control them," she muttered, loudly enough for surrounding passengers to hear. Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice calm and steady. "I'm sorry if we disturbed you. She just lost her balance for a moment." "I'm okay, Mama," Emma said quietly, sensing the tension. They returned to their seats without further incident, but Sarah noticed the flight attendant, a blonde woman named Jennifer, according to her name tag, watching them with an expression that made Sarah uncomfortable. There was something cold in her eyes, something that went beyond professional observation. "Everything all right?" Sarah asked Emma as they settled back into their seats. "That lady wasn't very nice," Emma observed, with the straightforward honesty of a 5-year-old. "Some people have bad days, sweetheart. We just keep being kind anyway." 20 minutes later, Emma needed another bathroom trip. This time, Sarah made sure they moved extra carefully down the aisle, but as they returned to their seats, Emma's elephant fell from her arms. It landed in the aisle, and as a flight attendant approached with the snack cart, she had to step over it. Sarah quickly retrieved Mr. Peanuts, but not before noticing Jennifer's sharp look of annoyance. "I'm so sorry," Sarah apologized. Jennifer didn't acknowledge the apology, instead continuing with her duties with visible irritation. Sarah felt a growing sense of unease, but tried to dismiss it as paranoia. The next hour passed peacefully enough. Emma dozed against Sarah's shoulder while Sarah read her book, a romance novel that provided a welcome escape from reality. The gentle hum of the engines and the warmth of her daughter's small body against her side almost lulled Sarah to sleep as well. She was jolted awake by Emma's distressed voice. "Mama, I feel sick." Sarah immediately switched into nurse mode, checking Emma's forehead and observing her color. The little girl did look pale, and Sarah could tell this wasn't just a case of airplane nerves. "What kind of sick, sweetheart? Your tummy?" Emma nodded miserably. "And I feel hot." Sarah reached into her carry-on bag for the children's thermometer she always traveled with, along with some pediatric medicine. Emma's temperature was slightly elevated. Not dangerous, but enough to make her uncomfortable. "Let me get you some water and see if you can take a small sip," Sarah said, gently. As she pressed the call button for assistance, Sarah noticed several passengers watching them with expressions ranging from concern to annoyance. Air travel with sick children was challenging for everyone, but Emma's health came first. Jennifer appeared at their row with visible reluctance. "Yes? Could I get some water for my daughter, please?" "She's not feeling well." Jennifer's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is she going to be sick? Because if she's contagious, that's a problem for other passengers." Sarah felt her professional training kick in. "She has a low-grade fever, probably from excitement and travel fatigue. I'm a registered nurse, and I don't believe she's contagious. I just want to keep her hydrated and comfortable." "A nurse?" Jennifer repeated, her tone suggesting skepticism. "Yes, I work at Chicago General Hospital. I have my credentials if you need to see them." Jennifer's attitude seemed to shift, becoming even more hostile. "Well, nurse, if your child disrupts this flight or makes other passengers uncomfortable, we'll have to discuss other arrangements." The threat was clear, and Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the airplane's air conditioning. She'd heard stories of families being removed from flights, but she'd never imagined finding herself in such a situation. "I understand your concern, but she's not disruptive. She's just not feeling well." Jennifer left without bringing the requested water, and Sarah had to flag down another flight attendant to get Emma the drink she needed. The other attendant, an older man named Robert, was much more sympathetic and even brought some crackers in case Emma's stomach settled enough to eat something. "Mama, why was that lady mean?" Emma asked after taking a few small sips of water. Sarah chose her words carefully. "Sometimes people are having a hard day, and it makes them forget to be kind. But we don't let other people's bad days ruin our good attitude, right?" Emma nodded solemnly, though Sarah could see she was troubled by the interaction. As they continued toward Seattle, Sarah found herself watching Jennifer's movements around the cabin, noting how differently the flight attendant treated various passengers. There was a warmth and professionalism she showed to some travelers that was completely absent in her interactions with Sarah and Emma. Sarah tried to push down the growing realization of what might be motivating Jennifer's hostility, but the patterns were becoming too obvious to ignore. She'd experienced subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination before, but never in such a confined space with her child present. The plane hit a patch of mild turbulence, and Emma gripped Sarah's hand tightly. "It's okay, baby. Just a few bumps. We'll be with Uncle Michael soon." but Sarah had a sinking feeling that the real turbulence was just beginning. Emma had finally fallen asleep against Sarah's shoulder when the first real confrontation began. It started innocuously enough. Emma's small foot had slipped slightly into the aisle as she slept, her child-sized legs not quite fitting properly in the cramped airplane seat. Sarah was dozing lightly herself, her book closed on her lap, when she felt someone roughly shake her shoulder. Her eyes flew open to find Jennifer standing over them, her expression severe. "Ma'am, your daughter's foot is blocking the aisle. This is a safety violation." Sarah looked down at Emma's foot, which was barely protruding past the armrest. She gently adjusted her daughter's position without waking her. "There, all fixed. Sorry about that." But Jennifer didn't move away. Instead, she remained standing there, her voice rising slightly. "This has been an ongoing issue. Your child has been disruptive throughout this flight." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. Emma had been anything but disruptive. She'd been quieter than many of the adult passengers, most of whom had been drinking and talking loudly since takeoff. "I'm not sure what you mean," Sarah said carefully, keeping her voice low to avoid waking Emma. "She's been very well behaved. She's been up and down the aisle multiple times, disturbing other passengers. She knocked over items in the restroom, stumbled into other passengers' seats, and now she's blocking the aisle with safety violations." Other passengers were beginning to turn and stare. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized that Jennifer was deliberately creating a scene. She used the restroom twice during a 4-hour flight, which is normal for a 5-year-old. She accidentally dropped some paper towels, which we cleaned up immediately, and she briefly lost her balance once, which happens to adults too in these narrow aisles. Jennifer's voice grew louder. "Are you arguing with me about flight safety regulations?" Sarah took a deep breath, drawing on all her experience dealing with difficult situations in the hospital. "I'm not arguing. I'm simply stating facts. My daughter has been well behaved, and I've been supervising her carefully. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to keep your child under better control, or we'll have to consider other options when we land." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Sarah felt Emma stirring in her arms and realized her daughter was waking up to this hostile confrontation. "Mama?" Emma's sleepy voice was confused and slightly frightened. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just rest." But Jennifer wasn't finished. "And another thing, I've noticed you giving your child medication without informing the crew. That's another safety issue." Sarah's professional training kicked in, and she felt her spine straighten. "I gave my daughter children's fever reducer because she had a low-grade temperature. As a registered nurse, I'm qualified to administer basic pediatric care to my own child." "So, you claim to be a nurse," Jennifer said with obvious skepticism. "Do you have proof of these credentials?" The challenge was clearly meant to embarrass Sarah in front of the other passengers. Several people were now openly watching the confrontation, and Sarah could hear whispered comments. "I have my hospital ID and nursing license in my purse if—" "You need to see them," Sarah replied calmly, though inside she was seething. "That won't be necessary right now, but I want to make it clear that any further disruptions from your section will result in serious consequences." Robert, the older male flight attendant, approached cautiously. "Jennifer, is everything all right here?" "Just ensuring passenger safety and compliance with regulations," Jennifer replied crisply. Robert glanced at Sarah and Emma with kind eyes. "I haven't noticed any problems. The little one has been very good." Jennifer's face flushed slightly. "I'll handle this, Robert." After Jennifer walked away, Robert lingered for a moment. "Is there anything I can get for you or your daughter?" he asked quietly. "Thank you, but we're fine," Sarah replied. Though she was far from fine, Emma was now fully awake and clearly distressed. "Mama, why was that lady yelling?" "She wasn't yelling, sweetie. She was just doing her job." The lie felt bitter on Sarah's tongue, but she couldn't explain prejudice to a 5-year-old at 30,000 feet. "I don't like her," Emma whispered. "We don't have to like everyone, but we still treat people with respect," Sarah said, though she was struggling to follow her own advice. As they sat in the aftermath of the confrontation, Sarah noticed how the other passengers were looking at them. Some seemed sympathetic. Others appeared to accept Jennifer's version of events. A few looked openly hostile, as if Sarah and Emma were indeed the problem passengers Jennifer had portrayed them to be. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Flight tracking shows you're on schedule. Can't wait to see you both." She stared at the message, wishing she could tell her brother what was happening. But what could he do from the ground in Seattle? Besides, she didn't want to worry him or ruin Emma's excitement about seeing her uncle. The passenger across the aisle, a middle-aged black woman who had been quietly reading throughout the flight, caught Sarah's eye and offered a small, knowing nod. In that brief moment, Sarah felt less alone. The woman had witnessed the exchange and understood what had really happened. Emma snuggled closer to her mother. "Are we still going to see Uncle Michael?" "Of course, sweetheart, nothing's going to change that." But as Sarah looked toward the front of the cabin where Jennifer was speaking in low, intense tones with the other flight attendants, she wondered if she was making a promise she might not be able to keep. The plane began its initial descent toward Seattle, and Sarah tried to push down the growing anxiety in her chest. All she wanted was to get off this plane, collect their luggage, and disappear into Michael's waiting arms. She had no idea that the worst was yet to come. As the plane began its descent into Seattle, Sarah felt a brief moment of relief. Soon they would be on the ground, away from Jennifer's hostile glares and manufactured complaints. She helped Emma look out the window at the city sprawling below. Them, pointing out the Space Needle and the sparkling waters of Puget Sound. "Look, sweetheart, that's where Uncle Michael lives?" Emma pressed her face to the small window, her earlier distress forgotten in the excitement of seeing the city from above. "It's so big, Mama, and look at all the water." Sarah smiled, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. Whatever had happened during the flight would soon be behind them. They just needed to get through landing and deplaning, and then they'd be free. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Flight attendants, please prepare for landing." Sarah made sure Emma's seatbelt was secure and that Mr. Peanuts was safely tucked away. Around them, passengers were closing books, putting away devices, and returning seats to their upright positions. The familiar routine of landing preparation continued normally. That's when Jennifer appeared at their row again. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "I'm sorry? I need to speak with you privately. Now." Sarah glanced around the cabin. Other passengers were staring again, and she could feel Emma tensing beside her. "We're preparing for landing. Can't this wait until we're on the ground?" "No, it cannot wait." Jennifer's voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. "This is about the incidents during the flight." Sarah felt trapped. They were strapped into their seats. The plane was descending, and every eye in their section was on them. She looked down at Emma, who was clutching Mr. Peanuts tightly. "What exactly do you need to discuss?" Jennifer leaned down, lowering her voice, but not enough to prevent nearby passengers from hearing. "Your behavior and that of your child have been consistently disruptive. I've documented multiple safety violations and instances of noncompliance with crew instruction." "That's not true," Sarah said firmly. "We've followed every instruction and have been nothing but cooperative." "Are you calling me a liar?" Jennifer's voice rose again. The passenger behind them, an elderly gentleman, leaned forward. "Excuse me, but I've been sitting right here the whole flight. This lady and her little girl have been perfectly well behaved. The child has been quieter than most adults on this plane." Jennifer's face flushed red. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this is crew business." "I'm just saying what I've observed," the man replied calmly. The woman across the aisle spoke up as well. "I agree. I've been watching this whole thing, and you've been picking on this mother and child for no good reason." More passengers began to murmur, some in support of Sarah, others seeming to side with the flight attendant's authority. The cabin was filling with tension that had nothing to do with the approaching landing. "Ma'am," Jennifer said, focusing back on Sarah, I'm informing you that airport security will be meeting this aircraft upon arrival. Your behavior has been noted, and there may be consequences regarding your future travel with this airline." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Security for what?" "Disruptive passenger behavior, failure to comply with crew instructions, and creating a disturbance." "Mama, what's happening?" Emma's small voice was frightened. Sarah put her arm around her daughter, trying to project calm she didn't feel. "It's okay, sweetheart, just a misunderstanding." But it wasn't okay, and they both knew it. Robert appeared behind Jennifer, his expression troubled. "Jennifer, perhaps we should discuss this after landing. The passengers need to prepare—" "I'm handling this, Robert," Jennifer snapped. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "We're beginning our final approach. Flight attendants, take your seats." Jennifer gave Sarah one final cold look. "We'll continue this conversation on the ground." She turned and walked toward the front of the cabin. As soon as she was gone, the gentleman behind them leaned forward again. "Miss, I want you to know that I saw everything. That flight attendant has been harassing you since the beginning of the flight. I'll be happy to speak to anyone who needs to hear what really happened." "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The woman across the aisle nodded firmly. "I saw it too. This is completely inappropriate." Emma was crying quietly. Now, overwhelmed by the tension and conflict, she didn't understand. Sarah held her close, whispering reassurances, while her own mind raced. What would happen when they landed? Would security really be waiting? Could they prevent her from leaving the airport? Her phone buzzed with another text from Michael. "Just left the office. Heading to the airport now. See you soon?" Sarah stared at the message, unsure whether she should warn him about what was happening. The last thing she wanted was for Michael to worry, but if security was really going to detain them— As the plane touched down on the runway and began taxiing to the gate, Sarah made a decision. She quickly typed, "There's been a problem with the flight attendant. We might be delayed getting off the plane. I'll explain everything soon." Michael's response was immediate. "What kind of problem? Are you okay?" "We're fine. Just some kind of misunderstanding." "Don't worry." But Sarah was worried, very worried. She'd heard stories of passengers being detained, questioned, even banned from airlines based on crew complaints. The thought of Emma having to witness her mother being questioned by security made her feel sick. As they pulled up to the gate, Sarah noticed Jennifer speaking intently into the airplane's phone. She was clearly communicating with someone on the ground, and from her gestures and expression, it wasn't a casual conversation. The seatbelt sign turned off, and passengers began standing and retrieving their carry-on luggage. Sarah remained, seated, unsure of what to do. Should she try to leave normally, or wait for whatever Jennifer had planned? Emma tugged on her sleeve. "Mama, can we go see Uncle Michael now?" Sarah looked down at her daughter's trusting face and made another decision. Whatever happened, she would not let Emma be traumatized any more than she already had been. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to see Uncle Michael right now." She stood up, gathered their belongings, and joined the line of departing passengers. If Jennifer wanted to escalate this situation, she would have to do it in front of witnesses and— With a 5-year-old watching, as they slowly moved toward the front of the plane, Sarah's phone rang. "Michael." "Sarah, what's going on? Are you okay?" Sarah glanced ahead and saw Jennifer watching her intently. "I'll explain everything in a few minutes," she said quietly into the phone. "Just be prepared. This might get complicated. I'm already at the gate," Michael said. "Whatever's happening, we'll handle it together." If only he knew, Sarah thought, how much they might need to handle. Michael Johnson paced near Gate 12 at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. At 38, he cut an impressive figure in his tailored charcoal suit, though worry lines creased his normally confident expression. Sarah's cryptic text messages had left him deeply concerned, and the 20-minute delay since the plane had arrived at the gate was making him increasingly anxious. As the executive vice president of operations for Anderson Airlines, Michael was accustomed to solving problems quickly and efficiently. But this situation felt different, more personal, and the lack of information was driving him to distraction. He'd already checked with the gate agents twice, and they'd assured him that deplaning was proceeding normally, just slowly due to the full flight. His phone rang with a call from his assistant, Janet. "Michael, I know you're picking up your sister, but we have a situation developing with Flight 447 from Chicago." Michael's blood ran cold. "That's Sarah's flight. What kind of situation?" "I'm getting reports of a passenger complaint situation. Something about disruptive behavior and a possible security response. I thought you should know since you're there." Michael's mind immediately went to worst-case scenarios. "Is my sister involved?" "I don't have specific passenger names yet, but given the timing of your call and the flight number, get me everything you can on this situation, now." Michael's voice carried the authority that had earned him his position. "And Janet, discretion is essential." "Of course. I'll have more information within the hour." As Michael ended the call, he saw the first passengers beginning to emerge from the jetway. His eyes scanned every face, looking for Sarah's familiar features and Emma's bright smile. Several minutes passed with no sign of them, and Michael's concern deepened. That's when he saw her. Sarah appeared in the jetway doorway, carrying a clearly distressed Emma. Even from a distance, Michael could see the tension in his sister's posture and the way Emma was clinging to her mother. Behind them walked an older gentleman and a middle-aged woman, both looking concerned and protective. Michael strode forward, his long legs covering the distance quickly. "Sarah!" The relief on his sister's face when she saw him was immediate and overwhelming. "Michael, thank God." He swept both of them into his arms, feeling Emma's small body trembling against his chest. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "We're not hurt," Sarah said quietly. "But there was a problem with one of the flight attendants. She's claiming we were disruptive and—" "Excuse me?" Michael turned to find a blonde flight attendant approaching, flanked by 2 airport security officers. Behind her walked another flight attendant, an older man who looked deeply uncomfortable with the situation. Jennifer stepped forward, her chin raised with authority. "Are you with these passengers? I'm Michael Johnson, and this is my sister. Sarah and my niece, Emma." "What seems to be the problem?" Jennifer's eyes narrowed as she took in Michael's expensive suit and confident bearing. "Your sister and her child were disruptive during the flight. There were multiple safety violations, non-compliance with crew instructions, and confrontational behavior toward crew members." Michael felt his protective instincts flare, but his corporate training kept his voice level. "I find that very hard to believe. My sister is a registered nurse and one of the most responsible people I know. Nevertheless, we have documented incidents," Jennifer continued. "We need to file a report, and there may be restrictions on future travel." One of the security officers, a professional-looking woman in her 40s, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we've reviewed the initial complaint, but we'd like to speak with all parties involved before determining if any action is necessary." The older gentleman, who had been sitting behind Sarah, spoke up. "Officer, I was sitting directly behind this lady and her daughter for the entire 4-hour flight. I can tell you categorically that they were not disruptive. In fact, the little girl was better behaved than most adults on that plane." The woman from across the aisle nodded vigorously. "I witnessed this flight attendant harassing this mother from the very beginning. It was completely unprofessional and, frankly, discriminatory." Jennifer's face flushed red. "These passengers don't understand the full situation." "What exactly are you claiming happened?" Michael asked, his voice taking on the steel that his business associates knew meant he was prepared for battle. "Multiple aisle obstructions, failure to control her child's behavior, arguing with crew instructions, and creating a disturbance that affected other passengers." Robert, the other flight attendant, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Actually, I was working the same flight, and I didn't observe any of the behaviors described. The child was very well behaved, and the mother was cooperative throughout." Jennifer whirled on him. "Robert, you weren't present for all the incidents." was present for the entire flight," he replied firmly. "And so were the passengers who have spoken up." The security officer looked between the conflicting accounts with professional skepticism. "Ma'am," she said to Jennifer, "do you have any documentation of these alleged incidents? Video written?" "Reports, witness statements from other passengers," Jennifer faltered slightly. The incidents happened quickly, and I was focused on passenger safety rather than documentation." Emma, who had been quietly listening from the safety of her uncle's arms, suddenly spoke up. "The mean lady was yelling at Mama. Mama didn't do anything wrong." Michael felt something dangerous flash through him at hearing his niece describe being yelled at by an adult. He looked at Jennifer with new eyes, seeing something in her expression that he'd encountered before in his corporate career. The look of someone who had overplayed their hand and was beginning to realize it. "Officer," Michael said, his voice carefully controlled, "I'd like to request a formal review of this complaint. I believe when you investigate thoroughly, you'll find that this situation has been greatly exaggerated, if not completely fabricated." "And you are?" the security officer asked, pulling out a notebook. Michael reached into his jacket and withdrew his business card. "Michael Johnson, Executive Vice President of Operations, Anderson Airlines." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer's face went white as she stared at the business card. The security officer's eyebrows rose slightly, and even Robert looked surprised. "I see," the officer said carefully. "Mr. Johnson, while I understand your personal interest in this matter, we still need to review the complaint objectively." "Of course," Michael replied. "I wouldn't expect anything less. But I would also like to ensure that this complaint is based on facts rather than other motivations." His eyes never left Jennifer's face as he spoke, and she seemed to shrink under his gaze. Sarah shifted Emma to her other hip, finally finding her voice. "I just want to take my daughter and leave. We haven't done anything wrong." "Of course you haven't," Michael said, his arm tightening protectively around both of them. "And we're going to make sure everyone understands that." The security officer closed her notebook. "Based on the conflicting accounts and the testimony of multiple witnesses, I don't see grounds for any formal action at this time. However, I will be filing a report of this incident for airline review." Her eyes found Jennifer's. "All aspects of this incident will be reviewed." As the small crowd began to disperse, Michael kept his family close while his mind was already working on the implications of what had just happened. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Come on," he said gently to Sarah and Emma. "Let's get you home." But as they walked away, he was already planning his next moves. Someone had threatened his family, and Michael Johnson never forgot a threat. The drive from the airport to Michael's downtown Seattle condominium was quiet, except for Emma's occasional observations about the city scenery. Sarah sat in the passenger seat of Michael's BMW, emotionally drained from the flight experience, while Emma was secured in the car seat Michael had purchased specifically for her visit. "Uncle Michael, your car is really fancy," Emma said, running her small hands over the leather interior. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm glad you like it." Michael glanced at his niece in the rearview mirror, his heart still heavy from seeing her frightened at the airport. "Are you feeling better now?" "Yes." "That mean lady isn't here anymore." Michael's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. "That's right. You're safe now." Sarah stared out the window at the Seattle skyline, her mind replaying every moment of the flight. "I can't believe that just happened," she said quietly. "In all my years of traveling, I've never experienced anything like that." "Tell me everything," Michael said as he navigated through downtown traffic. "From the beginning." Sarah recounted the entire flight experience, Jennifer's hostile looks from the start, the manufactured complaints, the escalating confrontations, and finally the threat to have them met by security. Michael listened in silence, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "She singled you out from the beginning," he said, when Sarah finished. "This wasn't about Emma being disruptive or any safety violations." "I know." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I've experienced subtle discrimination before, but never anything this blatant." especially not in front of Emma. They pulled into the garage of Michael's building, a gleaming high-rise in the heart of Seattle's business district. As they rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, Emma's excitement about the tall building temporarily overshadowed the earlier trauma. "Mama, look how high we're going!" Emma pressed her face to the glass elevator wall, watching the city shrink below them. Michael's penthouse was everything Sarah had expected, modern, sophisticated, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. But what surprised her were the small touches he'd added for their visit. A basket of Emma's favorite snacks, coloring books and crayons on the coffee table, and a small stuffed orca whale sitting on the guest room bed. "Michael, you didn't have to do all this," Sarah said, touching his arm. "I wanted Emma to feel welcome. This is her uncle's house, after all." He knelt down to Emma's level. "What do you think, kiddo? Want to see your room?" As Emma explored her temporary bedroom with delight, Michael and Sarah settled in the living room. Michael poured himself a scotch and offered Sarah a glass of wine, which she gratefully accepted. "Need to tell you something," Michael said, his expression serious. "That flight attendant, Jennifer, she made a significant mistake today." "What do you mean?" "She doesn't know who she was dealing with, not just because I work for the airline, but because of what this situation represents." Michael took a sip of his drink, choosing his words carefully. "Sarah, I've been fighting discrimination in the corporate world for 15 years. I've seen it, experienced it, and worked to change it. What happened to you today wasn't just unprofessional. It was illegal." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I kept thinking maybe I was overreacting, maybe—" "No." Michael's voice was firm. "You weren't overreacting. That woman profiled you and Emma from the moment you boarded. She manufactured complaints, created confrontations, and threatened you with security for being black passengers who didn't stay invisible enough for her comfort. But what can we do about it? It's her word against mine." Michael smiled grimly. "Actually, it's not. Did you know that all interactions in airplane cabins are recorded, audio and video, and more importantly, we have multiple passenger witnesses who saw exactly what happened?" Sarah's eyes widened. "The passengers who spoke up at the gate? I got their contact information before they left. The gentleman behind you is Robert Chen, a retired federal judge. The woman across the aisle is Dr. Patricia Williams, a civil rights attorney. Jennifer picked the wrong flight to display her racist prejudices." Emma came running back into the living room, clutching the orca whale. "Uncle Michael, can we go see the real whales?" "Absolutely, sweetheart. Tomorrow we'll take a ferry out to look for orcas. Would you like that?" "Yes." "Mama, did you hear? We're going to see whales." Sarah smiled at her daughter's resilience, but her mind was still processing what Michael had told her. "So what happens now?" "Now I'm going to make some calls. Jennifer threatened the wrong family today, and she's going to learn that actions have consequences." Michael's expression softened as he looked at Emma. "But first, we're going to order pizza, watch movies, and give Emma the weekend she deserves." As if summoned by the mention of pizza, Emma climbed onto the couch between them. "Can we get pepperoni? And can we watch the movie with the princess who has ice powers?" "Whatever you want, princess," Michael said, wrapping his arm around his niece. Later that evening, after Emma had fallen asleep in her room, Michael and Sarah talked quietly in the kitchen while Michael prepared coffee. "I need to ask you something," Sarah said. "When you showed that security officer your business card, the flight attendant looked like she'd seen a ghost. How high up are you at Anderson Airlines?" Michael handed her a mug of coffee and leaned against the counter. "High enough that Jennifer's supervisor reports to someone who reports to me. High enough that I review personnel files and make decisions about employee conduct. High enough that when someone mistreats my family, I can ensure there are meaningful consequences. You're going to fire her. I'm going to ensure that a thorough investigation takes place. If that investigation confirms what we both know happened, and it will, then yes, Jennifer will face appropriate disciplinary action up to and including termination." Sarah sipped her coffee, wrestling with mixed emotions. "Part of me wants her fired, But another part of me wonders if that just makes things worse. What if she learns from this? What if she becomes a better person? Sarah, your compassion is one of the things I've always admired about you, but some lessons can only be learned through real consequences. Jennifer had every opportunity to treat you with basic human dignity, and she chose not to. Repeatedly, Michael's voice hardened. She threatened to have you and Emma detained by security over manufactured complaints. She terrorized a 5-year-old. Child, that's not a mistake. That's a pattern of behavior that has no place in our industry. You're right, Sarah said quietly. I've spent so much of my life trying to keep the peace, trying not to make waves. And that's exactly what people like Jennifer count on. They count on our discomfort with confrontation, our desire to just move on and forget about it. Michael set down his mug and looked directly at his sister. But Emma was watching today. She saw how that woman treated her mother. What lesson do we teach her if we just let it go? Sarah thought about Emma's frightened face, her small voice asking why the mean lady was yelling. We teach her that she doesn't have the right to be treated with dignity. Exactly. And that's not the lesson I want my niece to learn. As they sat in comfortable silence, Sarah felt grateful, not just for Michael's position and power, but for having a brother who understood the weight of what had happened. She'd carried the burden of discrimination alone for so long, making excuses for others' behavior and minimizing her own experiences. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For believing me, for taking this seriously, for making sure Emma and I weren't alone in this. Michael reached over and squeezed her hand. You're my family, Sarah. Nobody threatens my family and walks. Away unchanged, outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle sparkled in the darkness. Somewhere in that city, Jennifer was probably going about her evening, unaware that her actions had set in motion a chain of events that would forever change her life. Sarah thought about the passengers who had spoken up for them, the security officer who had listened fairly, and even Robert, the flight attendant who had contradicted his colleague's story. Maybe there was hope for change after all, but first there would be justice. And for the first time since boarding Flight 447, Sarah felt like she could breathe freely again. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Seattle weather that matched the serious mood in the Anderson Airlines headquarters. Michael sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor, reviewing the weekend's events, while his assistant, Janet, compiled information about Flight 447. At 8:30 sharp, his phone rang. Michael, I have the preliminary report on the Chicago flight incident, Janet said, and you're not going to like what I'm seeing. Come in and brief me. Janet entered, carrying a thick folder and her tablet. A woman in her 50s with silver's hair and sharp intelligence. She'd been Michael's right hand for over 8 years and knew how to cut through corporate bureaucracy when necessary. I pulled the audio recordings from Flight 447, reviewed the crew reports, and compiled the passenger witness statements. There's also security footage from the gate. She placed the folder on his desk. Michael, this is bad. Really bad. How bad? Jennifer Phillips has 17 complaints filed against her in the past 2 years. 17. All involving passengers of color, families with children, or elderly passengers. Each complaint was investigated by her immediate supervisor, Dave Morrison, and dismissed as misunderstandings or passenger overreactions. Michael felt his jaw clench. Morrison buried 17 complaints? It gets worse. I pulled the audio from Saturday's flight. Janet connected her tablet to the wall-mounted screen. The cabin recording system captured everything. Listen to this. The audio played, and Michael heard Jennifer's voice, clearly audible, as she spoke to other passengers. Some people shouldn't travel if they can't afford to fly properly. There was a pause, then. Did you see how she dressed that child? No wonder they can't control her behavior. Michael's hands tightened on his desk. When did she say this? During the beverage service, about an hour into the flight. Before any of the so-called incidents, she reported. The recording continued, capturing Jennifer's increasingly hostile interactions with Sarah and Emma, her manufactured complaints, and, most damning of all, her conversation with another crew member, where she said, "These people think they can act however they want. Someone needs to put them in their place." Jesus, Michael breathed. This isn't just discrimination, it's systematic harassment. Janet nodded grimly. The passenger statements corroborate everything. Judge Chen was particularly detailed in his account. He said, and I quote, "In 40 years on the bench, I've rarely seen such blatant discriminatory behavior. The flight attendant's conduct was appalling and potentially criminal." Michael stood and walked to his window, looking out over the city, where his sister was probably helping Emma get ready for their whale-watching trip. The contrast between the innocent joy of a child's vacation and the ugliness of what had been done to them made his anger burn hotter. What about the security footage from the gate? It shows everything. Jennifer's aggressive posture, your sister's obvious distress, Emma clinging to her mother. More importantly, it shows Jennifer speaking to the security officers before they approached your sister. She was clearly coaching them on what to expect. Michael turned back to face his assistant. And Morrison's response to all this? That's where it gets interesting. I called Morrison this morning to discuss the incident report. He tried to downplay everything, said Jennifer was just doing her job and that difficult passengers sometimes misinterpret standard procedures. Even after seeing the evidence? He hasn't seen the evidence yet. I told him there would be a formal review, and his first response was to ask if he needed to call the union representative. He's already in defense mode. Michael returned to his desk and picked up the phone. "Get me legal on the line. We need to discuss potential liability issues, then schedule a meeting with HR for this afternoon. And Janet, I want Morrison in my office at 10 o'clock. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to ensure that this airline lives up to its stated values of treating every passenger with dignity and respect, starting with a complete investigation of how 17 complaints were swept under the rug." At exactly 10 o'clock, Dave Morrison knocked on Michael's office door. A heavy-set man in his early 50s with thinning hair and a nervous manner, Morrison had been with Anderson Airlines for 23 years, working his way up from baggage handler to crew supervisor. "Dave, sit down." Michael's tone was professional but cold. "We need to discuss the incident on Flight 447 from Chicago on Saturday." Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Jennifer already filed her report. Difficult passenger's child? Running wild. Mother arguing with crew instructions. Standard stuff, really." "Standard?" Michael leaned back in his chair. "Dave, how many complaints have been filed against Jennifer Phillips in the past 2 years?" Morrison's eyes darted away. "I'd have to check the exact number." 17. 17 complaints, all dismissed without proper investigation. Michael's voice remained level, but his eyes were steel. Complaints involving discriminatory treatment, harassment, and intimidation of passengers. "Now, wait a minute," Morrison said, his voice rising slightly. "Those were all explained. Passengers sometimes misunderstand standard safety procedures. Did you listen to the cabin audio recordings before dismissing those complaints?" Morrison went pale. "Audio recordings?" "Every interaction is recorded, Dave. Every conversation, every confrontation, every discriminatory comment, including Jennifer's statement that these people need to be put in their place." The silence stretched between them for a long moment before Morrison found his voice. "Look, Michael, Jennifer's a good employee. She's been with us for 8 years, never missed a shift. Always professional." "Professional?" Michael stood and walked around his desk, stopping directly in front of Morrison. "Dave, the passenger she harassed was my sister. The 5-year-old child she terrorized was my niece." Morrison's face went from pale to gray. Your sister?" "My sister, who is a registered nurse, who has never had so much as a speeding ticket, who was traveling with her well-behaved daughter to visit family." Michael's voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more menacing than shouting. "Jennifer Phillips threatened to have them detained by airport security for the crime." of existing while black on her airplane. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't investigate. You didn't care enough about 17 separate complaints to spend 5 minutes reviewing the evidence. You created an environment where discriminatory behavior was not just tolerated but protected. Michael returned to his chair, his movements controlled and deliberate. Here's what's going to happen, Dave. You're going to provide HR with every file, every report, every communication related to Jennifer Phillips and every other crew member who has had complaints filed against them. You're going to participate fully in a complete investigation of your department's complaint procedures, and you're going to pray that our legal department doesn't find grounds for a discrimination lawsuit that could cost this company millions. Morrison opened his mouth to speak, but Michael held up a hand. I'm not finished. You're also going to personally apologize to my sister for the failure of supervision that led to her being harassed and threatened. And Dave, if I find out that you've destroyed any evidence, contacted Jennifer to coach her story, or interfered with this investigation in any way, your 23-year career with this company will end today. Morrison nodded mutely, sweat beading on his forehead. Get out of my office and get me those files. After Morrison left, Michael sat quietly for several minutes, thinking about Sarah and Emma enjoying their morning in his apartment, probably, making breakfast and planning their day. They deserved so much better than what they'd experienced. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emma says the whales better be ready for her visit today. Thank you for everything, Michael. Love you. Michael smiled for the first time that morning and typed back, Tell her the whales have been practicing their best tricks just for her. See you tonight. But his smile faded as he thought about Jennifer Phillips, who was probably getting ready for another shift, unaware that her world was about to change forever. Justice, Michael had learned long ago, wasn't just about punishment. It was about ensuring that what happened to Sarah and Emma never happened to anyone else, and he was just getting started. Jennifer Phillips arrived at Anderson Airlines' crew headquarters on Tuesday morning with no idea that her life was about to implode. She badged into the building at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes early as always, and stopped by the crew lounge for coffee before her scheduled briefing for Flight 293 to Denver. She was chatting with another flight attendant about weekend plans when her supervisor, Dave Morrison, approached with an expression she'd never seen before. Nervous, almost frightened. Jennifer, I need you to come with me. There's been a situation. What kind of situation? Jennifer asked. But Morrison was already walking toward the administrative offices, not the usual briefing room. They entered a conference room where Jennifer was surprised to see several people she didn't recognize. A woman from HR, a man in an expensive suit who looked like corporate legal, and another woman with a recording device. Morrison took a seat across from her, avoiding eye contact. Ms. Phillips, the HR representative, a professional woman named Karen Webb, began, We're here to discuss the incident that occurred on Flight 447 from Chicago to Seattle last Saturday. Jennifer felt a flutter of anxiety, but pushed it down. She'd filed her report, documented the problems with the difficult passengers. Everything was by the book. Of course, I already submitted my incident report about the disruptive passengers. The mother was argumentative, the child was running wild, and they created safety hazards throughout the flight. Karen Webb opened a thick folder. Ms. Phillips, we've conducted a preliminary investigation into your allegations. We've reviewed audio recordings, video footage, and spoken with multiple witnesses. We need to discuss some discrepancies between your report and the evidence. Discrepancies? Jennifer's voice rose slightly. I documented everything that happened. The legal representative, Thomas Klein, spoke for the first time. Ms. Phillips, before we continue, I need to inform you that this is a formal disciplinary hearing. You have the right to have a union representative present if you choose. Jennifer felt her world tilt. Disciplinary hearing? For what? I was protecting the safety of the passengers and maintaining order on the aircraft. Karen Webb pressed a button on the recording device. Ms. Phillips, I'm going to play some audio from the cabin recording system. Please listen carefully." Jennifer's own voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "Some people shouldn't travel if they can't afford to fly properly. Did you see how she dressed that child? No wonder they can't control her behavior. These people think they can act however they want. Someone needs to put them in their place." The blood drained from Jennifer's face. She'd forgotten about the cabin recording system, forgotten that every word spoken loud enough was captured and stored. "Ms. Phillips," Karen continued, "can you explain these comments?" Jennifer's mind raced. I was just talking to another crew member about passenger management. It's not... I didn't mean..." "You didn't mean what?" "That a registered nurse and her well-behaved 5-year-old daughter were people who needed to be put in their place?" "Well-behaved?" Jennifer found her voice, clinging to her version of events. "That child was running up and down the aisles, disturbing other passengers, creating safety hazards." Thomas Klein opened his laptop and turned it toward her. "Ms. Phillips, this is security footage from the gate area. Please watch carefully." The video showed the confrontation at the gate, but from Jennifer's perspective, it was damning. It clearly showed her aggressive posture, her animated discussion with security before they approached Sarah, and most tellingly, it showed Emma clinging fearfully to her mother while Jennifer towered over them, gesticulating angrily. "The child appears to be frightened, not disruptive," Karen observed, "and the mother appears to be trying to calm and protect her daughter from you." Jennifer watched the footage with growing horror. From this angle, with no audio of her explanations, she looked like exactly what she was: a bully terrorizing a child and her mother. "This doesn't show the whole story," she said desperately. "You don't see what happened during the flight, the multiple disruptions, the safety violations." "Actually, we do," Thomas said, closing the laptop. "We have 4 hours of cabin audio, testimony from multiple passengers, and a contradictory report from your fellow crew member, Robert Martinez. Robert wasn't paying attention to everything that happened. Robert was paying attention enough to document that the child slept for most of the flight, that the mother made exactly 2 trips to the restroom with her daughter, well within normal parameters, and that your interactions with these passengers became increasingly hostile without provocation." Karen Webb leaned forward. "Ms. Phillips, we also need to discuss the 17 complaints that have been filed against you over the past 2 years." Jennifer felt her heart stop. 17? That's not... there have been a few passenger complaints, but that's normal in this job. Some people just don't understand safety procedures. All 17 complaints involved passengers of color, families with children, or elderly passengers. All 17 were dismissed without proper investigation by Mr. Morrison. "Would you like to explain this pattern?" Jennifer looked at Morrison, who was staring at his hands. "Dave, tell them about the difficult passengers we have to deal with, how some people just look for reasons to complain." Morrison finally looked up, his face grave. "Jennifer, I can't help you with this. The evidence is overwhelming." "Evidence of what?" Jennifer's voice was rising to a near shout. "Evidence that I do my job? Evidence that I maintain safety and order on my flights? Evidence that you systematically harass passengers based on their race," Thomas Klein said bluntly. "Evidence that you create confrontations where none exist. Evidence that you abuse your authority to intimidate and threaten innocent people." The room fell silent except for Jennifer's labored breathing. The walls seemed to be closing in around her. "I want my union representative," she said finally. "That's your right," Karen agreed. "But Ms. Phillips, I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. We have documented evidence of discriminatory behavior that could expose this company to significant legal liability. This goes beyond employment discipline. This could be a matter for law enforcement." "Law enforcement?" Jennifer's voice cracked. "For doing my job?" "For a violation of passengers' civil rights," Thomas said. "The passenger you harassed and threatened is the sister of Michael Johnson, Executive Vice President of Operations for this airline. The child you terrorized is his niece. Mr. Johnson is considering both criminal charges and a federal civil rights lawsuit. The room spun around Jennifer. Michael Johnson. She'd heard the name, knew he was high up in the company hierarchy, but she'd never connected him to the passengers from Saturday's flight. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't know that your victims were related to a company executive," Karen said. "But that shouldn't matter, should it? Every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their connections." Jennifer slumped in her chair, finally understanding that her career was over. "What happens now?" Karen Webb closed the folder. "Pending the union meeting, you're suspended without pay. A final determination will be made after all investigations are complete. But Ms. Phillips, I'd strongly recommend you consult with an attorney. This situation extends far beyond employment issues." As the meeting broke up and Jennifer was escorted from the building, she couldn't stop thinking about the little girl with the stuffed elephant, the way she'd clung to her mother, the fear in her eyes. For the first time, Jennifer wondered if she'd been wrong about more than just who their family was connected to. But it was too late for such realizations now. 3 weeks after the incident on Flight 447, Sarah sat in the conference room of Michaels & Associates, a prestigious law firm in downtown Chicago. Across the table sat Jennifer Phillips, her union representative, Anderson Airlines' legal team, and a mediator appointed by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Sarah had initially resisted Michael's suggestion to pursue legal action, but after learning about the 17 other passengers who had been similarly treated, she realized this was about more than just her and Emma's experience. Ms. Phillips, the mediator, Judge Patricia Hawkins, addressed the former flight attendant directly. "You've had an opportunity to review all the evidence presented. Do you understand why your actions on Flight 447 constitute a violation of federal civil rights laws?" Jennifer, who looked like she'd aged years in the past 3 weeks, nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand that my behavior was inappropriate." "Inappropriate doesn't begin to cover it," said Marcus Williams, Sarah's attorney. "Ms. Phillips systematically harassed my client and her 5-year-old daughter based solely on their race. She manufactured safety violations, created confrontations, and threatened them with arrest for the crime of existing while black on her airplane." Jennifer's attorney, a tired-looking man named James Cooper, shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that mistakes were made. She's prepared to accept responsibility and make amends." "What kind of amends?" Judge Hawkins asked. Cooper consulted his notes. "Ms. Phillips is willing to write a formal letter of apology to Ms. Johnson and her daughter. She's also agreed to undergo sensitivity training and anger management counseling." Sarah looked at Jennifer, really looked at her for the first time since that terrible day on the airplane. The woman appeared genuinely remorseful, but Sarah had seen too many hollow apologies in her life to be easily swayed. "Ms. Phillips," Sarah said, speaking directly to her for the first time, "do you understand how your actions affected my daughter?" Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Yes, I think I do now. I saw the fear in her eyes that day, and I've been haunted by it ever since. Emma had nightmares for a week after we got home," Sarah continued, her voice steady but emotional. "She asked me why the lady on the airplane was so mean to us. She wanted to know if it was because she was bad or because I was bad. How do you explain systemic racism to a 5-year-old? "I can't," Jennifer whispered. "I don't know how to explain something that shouldn't exist." Michael, who had flown in from Seattle for the mediation, leaned forward. "Ms. Phillips, my sister is one of the kindest, most professional people you'll ever meet. She's a registered nurse who saves lives every day. Emma is a bright, well-behaved child who is excited to visit her uncle. They deserved better from you and from Anderson Airlines." "I know," Jennifer said, her voice barely audible. "I know they did." Judge Hawkins reviewed her notes. "Ms. Phillips, the evidence shows a pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning 2 years and affecting 18 families. This isn't an isolated incident or a simple misunderstanding. This represents systematic harassment of passengers based on their race and family status. The Anderson Airlines legal team, led by Senior Counsel Rebecca Martinez, spoke up. Your Honor, Anderson Airlines takes full responsibility for failing to properly investigate and address the previous complaints. We've implemented new training protocols, revised our complaint procedures, and appointed an independent ombudsman to review all passenger grievances. And what about Ms. Phillips specifically? Judge Hawkins asked. Ms. Phillips's employment was terminated for cause. She's been banned from working in any customer-facing capacity within the airline industry through the Transportation Workers Registry. Sarah felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness at hearing Jennifer's fate confirmed. Justice had been served, but it came at the cost of destroying someone's career and livelihood. Ms. Johnson, Judge Hawkins addressed Sarah, what would you like to see come from this situation? Sarah took a deep breath. She'd thought about this question for weeks. I want to make sure this never happens to another family. I want the other passengers who were mistreated to receive acknowledgement and compensation for their experiences. And I want Jennifer Phillips to understand, really understand, the impact of her actions. She turned to face Jennifer directly. I don't take pleasure in seeing you lose your job, but I can't forget the terror in my daughter's eyes, or the humiliation I felt being treated like a criminal for traveling while black. Jennifer wiped her eyes with a tissue. Ms. Johnson, I know words aren't enough, but I am truly sorry. I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that I've spent every day since that flight thinking about my actions and trying to understand how I became someone who could treat a child and her mother the way I treated you. And what have you learned? Sarah asked. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment before answering. I learned that I was carrying around prejudices and assumptions that I told myself weren't real. I convinced myself that I was just doing my job, maintaining order, following procedures. But the truth is, I was making decisions based on how people looked, not how they actually behaved. She paused, struggling with the words. I grew up in a small town where everyone looked like me. I never had to examine my biases because they were never challenged. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. And when I started working for the airline, I brought those biases with me. Michael nodded slowly. Recognition is the first step, Ms. Phillips. But recognition without action is meaningless. I know, Jennifer said. That's why I've enrolled in a cultural competency program at the community college. It's why I'm volunteering with a local civil rights organization. I'm trying to educate myself about the experiences of people who don't look like me. Judge Hawkins made several notes before addressing the room. Here's what's going to happen. Anderson Airlines will pay compensatory damages to Ms. Johnson and her daughter for the civil rights violations they experienced. They will also establish a fund to compensate the other affected passengers and implement the policy changes they've outlined. She turned to Jennifer. Ms. Phillips, in addition to the employment consequences you've already faced, you will complete 200 hours of community service with organizations serving communities of color. You will also participate in a restorative justice program where you'll meet with other passengers you've mistreated if they choose to participate. I understand, Your Honor, Jennifer said. Most importantly, Judge Hawkins continued, this case will serve as a precedent for holding both individual employees and their employers accountable for discriminatory behavior in the transportation industry. As the mediation concluded and people began filing out of the room, Jennifer approached Sarah hesitantly. Ms. Johnson, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. But I want you to know that your daughter seems like a wonderful little girl, and you're clearly an amazing mother. I'm sorry I made you question that, even for a moment. Sarah studied Jennifer's face, seeing genuine remorse and shame. Ms. Phillips, I hope you continue the work you've started on yourself, and I hope you find a way to use this experience to help others avoid making the same mistakes. I will, Jennifer promised. I swear to you, I will." As Sarah left the building, she felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. Justice had been served, but more importantly, maybe, just maybe, one person had been genuinely changed by the experience. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "How did it go?" Sarah replied. "Hard, but necessary. See you this weekend. For Emma's birthday? Wouldn't miss it. Love you both." Sarah smiled, thinking about Emma's upcoming 6th birthday party and all the family and friends who would be there to celebrate. It would be a much happier gathering than their last airplane trip, but that was okay. Sometimes the most important journeys happen on the ground, in conference rooms and classrooms and community centers, where people learn to see each other as fellow humans deserving of dignity and respect. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment. Sometimes it's about transformation. 6 months after the incident on Flight 447, Sarah stood in the bustling terminal of O'Hare International Airport, watching Emma bounce excitedly beside her. They were once again preparing to fly to Seattle. But this time, the circumstances were entirely different. "Mama, do you think Uncle Michael will like my surprise?" Emma asked, clutching a handmade card she'd created for her uncle's birthday. "I think he's going to love it, sweetheart," Sarah replied, smoothing down Emma's hair. At nearly 6 years, old Emma had grown taller and more confident, with no lingering traces of the fear that had marked their last airport experience. "Good afternoon, Miss Johnson." Sarah turned to find Captain Robert Chen, son of the retired judge who had spoken up for them on Flight 447, approaching with a warm smile. Anderson Airlines had personally assigned him to their flight as part of their commitment to ensuring Sarah and Emma's comfort. "Captain Chen, it's wonderful to see you again." "The pleasure is mine. I wanted to personally ensure that you and Emma have an exceptional flight experience today." He knelt down to Emma's level. "And how are you doing, young lady? Are you excited? To see your uncle?" "Yes, it's his birthday, and we're going to have cake and see the whales again." Emma's enthusiasm was infectious. "Well, we'd better get you there safely then. I have something special planned for our flight today." As they made their way through security and to their gate, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that traumatic day 6 months ago. The settlement from Anderson Airlines had allowed her to pay off her student loans and start a college fund for Emma. More importantly, the airline's new policies had already prevented similar incidents from occurring to other passengers. Jennifer's. Phillips had completed her community service and continued her work with civil rights organizations. Through the Restorative Justice Program, Sarah had actually met with her twice more. While they would never be friends, Sarah had seen genuine growth and change in the former flight attendant. Jennifer was now working as a counselor for a nonprofit organization, using her experience to help others examine their own biases. Flight 1205 to Seattle is now boarding, announced the gate agent. As they walked down the jetway, Emma skipped ahead excitedly while Sarah carried their bags. The flight attendant, greeting passengers at the aircraft door, a young woman named Maya, smiled warmly at them. "Welcome aboard. You must be the Johnson family. Captain Chen told us we have VIP passengers today." "VIP?" Emma giggled. "That's us, Mama." As they settled into their seats, complimentary first-class upgrades courtesy of the airline, Sarah felt none of the anxiety that had plagued her on previous flights. Emma immediately began chatting with the elderly gentleman across the aisle about her coloring books, while Sarah organized their carry-on items. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Chen speaking. We have a special passenger on board today, Miss Emma Johnson, who is traveling to celebrate her Uncle Michael's birthday. Emma, if you look out the left side of the aircraft as we take off, you'll see some very special cloud formations that I think you'll enjoy." Emma pressed her face to the window, beaming with pride at being mentioned by the captain. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. "For Michael. Janet just confirmed you're on board. Can't wait to see you both. I have amazing news to share." Sarah typed back, "Amazing news? Should I be worried? Only if you're worried about your big brother being happy. See you in a few hours." During the smooth flight, Emma dozed peacefully, while Sarah read a book, not a romance novel this time, but a biography of a civil rights leader that Jennifer had recommended during one of their meetings. It was part of Sarah's own journey of understanding and growth. Maya, the flight attendant, stopped by their seats periodically to check on them, but her attention felt natural and professional, not intrusive or manufactured. This was how airy travel was supposed to be. "Miss Johnson?" Maya approached as they began their descent into Seattle. "Captain Chen wanted me to give you this." She handed Sarah an envelope with the Anderson Airlines logo. Inside was a handwritten note from the airline's CEO, thanking Sarah for her courage in bringing the discrimination issues to light and informing her that the company had established the Johnson Family Excellence in Service Award, an annual recognition for employees who exemplify respectful, inclusive customer service. "Mama, what's that?" Emma asked, waking from her nap as the plane began its descent. "It's a thank you letter, sweetheart, for helping make airplanes a nicer place for all families." As they deplaned in Seattle, Sarah was surprised to see not only Michael waiting for them, but also Janet, his assistant, holding a bouquet of flowers and a happy birthday Uncle Michael balloon. "There are my favorite travelers." Michael swept Emma into a bear hug before embracing Sarah warmly. "How was the flight?" "It was perfect," Sarah said, and meant it. The captain announced Emma's name. The flight attendant was wonderful, and we even got upgraded to first class. "That's how it should always be," Michael said firmly. Then his expression shifted to one of barely contained excitement. "But I have news that's going to make this trip even better." "What kind of news?" Sarah asked suspiciously. Michael grinned and pulled out an envelope. "I've been offered a position as president and CEO of Pacific Coast Airlines. It's a smaller company, but they want me to help them build a reputation for exceptional customer service and inclusive policies." Sarah's eyes widened. "Michael, that's incredible. But what about Anderson?" "Anderson has been great to me, and I'll always be grateful for the opportunities they gave me. But after what happened to you and Emma, I realized I want to build something from the ground up. I want to create an airline where what happened to you could never happen to anyone." Emma tugged on Michael's sleeve. "Does that mean you're going to be the boss of airplanes?" "Something like that, Princess. And you know what? I'm going to need a special consultant to help me make sure all the passengers are happy. Someone who knows exactly how families should be treated when they fly." "Me?" Emma's eyes lit up. "If your mom agrees, you'll be my official Chief Happiness Officer." Sarah laughed, feeling tears of joy prick her eyes. I think she'd be perfect for the job. As they walked through the airport together, Sarah noticed the easy interactions between diverse passengers and airline staff, the families traveling comfortably, with their children, the elderly passengers receiving respectful assistance. The changes that had started with her complaint were rippling outward, creating a better experience for everyone. "There's something else," Michael said as they reached his car. "I've been in touch with Dr. Patricia Williams, the civil rights attorney who spoke up for you on that first flight. She's agreed to serve on Pacific Coast's board of directors and help us develop industry-leading anti-discrimination policies." The woman who sat across from us? The very same. She said that what she witnessed that day convinced her that the transportation industry needed fundamental change, not just policy adjustments. As they drove through Seattle's familiar streets, Emma chattering excitedly about whale watching and birthday cake, Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. What had started as a traumatic experience of discrimination had transformed into an opportunity for systemic change. "Uncle Michael," Emma said from her car seat, "when you're the boss of the airplane company, can you make sure all the ladies who work there are nice like Maya?" "That's exactly what I'm going to do, sweetheart. Every single person who works for our airline will be trained to treat every passenger with kindness and respect, even if they look different, especially if they look different. Because different is what makes the world interesting and beautiful." That evening, as they celebrated Michael's birthday with cake and presents, Sarah's phone rang. She was surprised to see Jennifer Phillips's name on the caller ID. "Sarah, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I know today was your flight to Seattle, and I wanted to make sure everything went well." Sarah stepped out onto Michael's balcony to take the call privately. "Everything was wonderful, Jennifer. Perfect, actually." "I'm so glad. I think about you and Emma often, especially when I hear about families traveling. I always hope they're being treated with the respect you deserved and didn't get from me. Jennifer, you've done the work to change. That matters. I have more work to do. I always will. But Sarah, I wanted you to know that 3 families have contacted me through the Civil Rights Organization. They were mistreated by other airline employees, and they wanted to speak with someone who understood. I was able to help them file complaints and get proper resolution." Sarah smiled. "That's wonderful. You're turning your experience into something positive." "I'm trying. It doesn't undo what I did to you and Emma, but maybe it prevents it from happening to others. That's all any of us can do, Jennifer. Learn, grow, and try to make things better." After ending the call, Sarah returned to the party to find Emma teaching Michael a dance she'd learned in kindergarten. The sight of her dignified executive brother attempting to follow a 6-year-old's choreography filled her heart with joy. "Everything okay?" Michael asked during a break in the dancing. "Everything's perfect, Sarah said. "Absolutely perfect." Later that night, as Emma slept peacefully in the guest room, Sarah and Michael sat on the balcony overlooking Elliott Bay, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about the future. "Are you nervous about starting your own airline?" Sarah asked. "Terrified," Michael admitted, "but also excited. I keep thinking about Emma's face that day at the gate, how frightened she was. I never want another child to experience that because of how they look or where they come from. She's so proud of you, you know. She tells everyone at school that her Uncle Michael is going to be the boss of airplanes." Michael chuckled. "And what about you? How are you feeling about everything?" Sarah considered the question. "Grateful. Angry that it happened, but grateful for what came from it. I feel like we turned something terrible into something meaningful." "You did more than that, Sarah. You changed an entire industry. Do you know that 5 other airlines have contacted Anderson, asking for copies of their new training protocols? The Johnson Family Excellence in Service Award isn't just internal, it's becoming an industry standard." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the wine. "I just wanted to make sure no other family went through what we did." "Mission accomplished, little sister." As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Seattle twinkle across the water, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with discrimination and fear, but it had led to justice, growth, and positive change. Tomorrow they would take Emma whale watching as promised. They would visit Pike Place Market and ride the ferry. Emma would collect memories of a perfect weekend with her uncle, completely different from the traumatic experience that had brought them together 6 months ago. But tonight, Sarah was content to sit with her brother, knowing that their family's painful experience had created ripples of change that would protect other families for years to come. Sometimes, the most important flights aren't the ones that take you from one city to another. Sometimes they're the ones that take you from injustice to justice, from silence to speaking up, from accepting the status quo to demanding better. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they take you to a place where a 5-year-old girl can be excited about flying to see her uncle, with no fear that she'll be treated as anything less than the precious, deserving human being she is. As Emma would say, that's the most important destination of all.